second part of my people study. I had a lot of jobs in my lifetime. I don't want to list them all, but I finally settled down to a job that I worked for 30 years in Bangor at Osram, Sylvania, which started out as Sylvania, GTE Sylvania, then something else, and finally ended up Osram, Sylvania when people from Germany bought it, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, I worked there 30 years. And the first 6 years I worked there was this gentleman that worked there. And this gentleman is the subject of this video. Maybe you won't find this interesting, but it is to me. Okay, we'll call him David. That was his first name. And he was one of them guys that as soon as I looked at him, I just felt that I didn't like him. I don't know whether you've ever had that happen before, but from my past experience, he just reminded me of something bad, and I just had a bad feeling about him. But I kept that to myself, and I tried to befriend him and talk to him. And I found out that by talking to him, that as soon as he looked at me, he didn't like me either. He hated me. And I never did anything to him. He just didn't like me. And I didn't like him. And maybe he could sense it. Anyway, he was a really odd person. And this is the meat of the thing. He didn't seem to be interested in anybody or anything in general. All of his friends were either alcoholics or thieves or criminals. It's the only people he really could even talk to. And everyday events seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. He was kind of, I think they call it an introvert, where he just kind of kept inside of himself. You couldn't really talk to him. And he was very arrogant and very mean, and he'd verbally lash out at you. Just a really hateful little man. And he was into motorcycles. I mean, when I say into motorcycles, that was it. Motorcycles. He was a motorhead right from the ground up. That's all he ever had any interest in. He lived in a little junky trailer in on a back road that he rented, just minimal survival. But he had a really nice BMW road bike. And at the time, it was way more expensive than anything I could afford. But he basically was spending all of his spare money making payments on that. Now, when I say he was a motorcycle nut, from where he lived to Arcadia National Park in Bar Harbor was, I don't know, I'm guessing here 50, 60 miles. And lots of mornings he'd get up before breakfast and go out and hop on the BMW and drive to Bar Harbor and go into the Bar Harbor Arcadia National Park and go up to Mount Cadillac and sit there and wait for the sun to come up. Yeah, he drove down there in the dark, cold, dark, and he'd watch the sun come up and then he'd turn around and drive back home again and have breakfast. Yeah, he did that a lot. And he always drove super, kind of a cafe style, where he laid down on the tank, and he always tried to stay above 100 miles an hour, which I could never figure out, because that's a really good way to get killed. And his idea of a good time would be to drive down a road he didn't know that was really curvy at 100 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, if you don't know what the next curve's like, that's basically a death wish. And doing that and hitting a patch of gravel and dumping the bike and going out through the woods, that was a good time for him. Driving along 100 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone and having a blue light come on behind him and pull him over, that was a good time. It's just the way the guy was, and we couldn't really figure him out. He was a little weird. So, okay, let's put him aside. And one day, maybe a year ago, I was watching a television program about a guy who was going to kayak across the Atlantic, and just a kayak. And when I saw the TV show, something struck me right away. This guy had the same beard as the motorcycle guy, and he could have been his twin brother. and they were doing a documentary on the whole thing, and he seemed to be totally disjointed. His wife was talking to him, and he'd just stare off. He didn't seem to be hooked up to anything except that kayak trip. And she kissed him goodbye, and he just kind of looked at her, and it really reminded me of David, big time. I mean, it could have been his brother, could have actually been him, it was so close. Well, they followed him out to sea a ways, and kind of, as he got out, he kind of opened up a little bit and started talking. And here's the point. Turns out that the guy is what I call an adrenaline junkie. Everyday things that would be traumatic to most people, to him, were nothing. The only way he could generate any adrenaline, and he basically lived on adrenaline, the only way he could get it was to do death-defying things, like paddling a kayak across the Atlantic Ocean in a storm. So he was always doing things like that, a lot like David with a motorcycle, just to generate adrenaline to keep himself happy. I know that sounds weird, but it's the way the guy was. He finally drowned, long story short. And David never did get killed on a motorcycle, I don't think. Had some really horrendous accidents, but I don't think he ever got killed. This guy drowned. So once he drowned, they kind of went back through his life and showed that he basically was an adrenaline junkie. And I really wasn't familiar with the adrenaline junkie thing. But once I saw that and got thinking about David, I realized, wow, David was an adrenaline junkie. And that's the reason why he and I never got along, because I'm just the opposite. You've probably noticed here that I do the same thing every day. I get up at 7 o'clock. I read the newspaper and drink my coffee. I come out to the factory and build a fire. I build product, and in the afternoon, I either shoot videos or ride a bike. I have to have a pattern that I follow every day, and if I get out of that pattern, it bothers me. I'm very easily upset by small things. If I ever got stopped by the police, it would take me 3 days to get over it. It really bothers me. And when things bother me, it generates a huge amount of adrenaline. So I'm looking for a steady, regular cycle of things that I'm doing without too much change to keep the adrenaline low, because I'm very easily upset by change. That's one reason why I have a hard time backpacking, because that's a total change of lifestyle for a day or two. So I'm trying to keep the adrenaline to an absolute minimum, and David was just the opposite. He was trying to generate adrenaline. So we were exact polar opposites, and that's the reason why we hated each other. They say opposites attract. Well, that may be true with men and women, but with guys, I'm thinking not so much. So once I realized all that, now I don't hate David anymore. I like him. And now that I understand that he's an adrenaline junkie and I could get inside of his head a little bit through this movie, I realize that I should have just left him alone and let him do his thing and never hated him. And that's given me some insight into some other people that just hate my guts, and I don't like them. It's the same thing. Once I figure them out, they're not so bad people anymore. I mean, they might hate me, but yeah, so what? A lot of people hate me. I don't hate anybody. I've pretty much made peace with the world. So anyway, that's my story about polar opposites and adrenaline junkies and the rest. And that's the story on David, which I'm really glad I saw this TV documentary, because it really gave me some insight and gave me some peace of mind about working with David. So I'm Tinny from Mini Bull Design. Get out and hike, take a friend, enjoy the great outdoors, and more important than anything, try to have a really great day. Try to have some fun today. Bye-bye.